Okay, I'm starting a 40-minute timer, then we'll do rapid fire at the end to try to hit as many as possible. If that sounds good.
Sounds good
Yeah.
to me.
Thank you so much for being here, guys. All right, yesterday, CJ Riker did an interview with them. So he asked a bunch of great questions. I want to do some follow-ups to some of the questions that you guys talked about. So one thing, the topic that I think you guys probably covered the most in the interview yesterday at different parts was about aspirational and pinnacle content. Some of the things that you said that was Uber Lilith at the start of the Diablo 4 was all mechanical mastery. If you don't dodge the waves, you're dead. There's pretty much nothing you can do about that. And a lot of players didn't have fun just, getting crushed by her waves. Talked about there's different levers to pull on the difficulty. You can make players weaker, like Nightmare Dungeon Sigils. You can make monsters hit harder. You can give them more health, more crowd control. And I heard you say that the decisions that you make before you go into the encounter should matter more because it's an ARPG. It's about hunting loot. It's about getting powerful. And then you go in and you have a big advantage and you finally overcome the difficulty. And another thing that I heard you guys say is when you guys introduce very difficult events like the Avatar of Zir, for example, when you properly advertise it as something that's very difficult, you didn't get any negative backlash or too much negative backlash for the difficulty of it because it was properly labeled. So with that huge preface in mind, my question is do you guys have plans in the future of Diablo 4 to build in these very difficult encounters that do require skill, that do require you to go in and with an event or with a boss, learn their mechanics, and that is going to be another supplement besides getting gear to winning? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I can just I'll start off. So yeah, everything we talked about yesterday, you just did a good job of covering again. I appreciate that. But when we think about what the future of aspirational content needs to look like in the game, we do want to leave opportunities for this kind of like mechanically complex content for players to engage with, and we experiment with it in a few different ways. So I don't think that like the Echo Lilith encounter, it's a really good example of us like diving really hard into mechanical mastery, where we expect players to really have to be very, very active in terms of their dodges in order to survive. But we do want to continue to experiment with these ideas and try more things, particularly when they are advertised in the appropriate place. Adam, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, originally I did, and it was like a very long-winded answer. But I don't want to take up too much time on this. I guess what I'll say is, um, everything kind of exists on a spectrum when we're talking about things like difficulty or a lot of game design topics and ideas. Like in this spectrum, in my mind, it's like, how hard should the theme be versus how much should your gear going into it matter, right? Um, I think we're still trying to find out what the best answer is for the things that are really, really hard, like Uber Lilith or these crazy difficult fights. One of the things that we're doing in season 4 that we started doing in Beyond, that one of our encounter designers came up with a great idea, was adding this. I think you've probably seen it already, Rax, but that stacking debuff idea, where you can screw up getting hit by a wave a couple times, but then after that, you're probably just going to get one shot and die. And so that gives us this kind of happy medium between pure one shot mechanics and things where you have to be perfect in your dexterity versus the other way where you can just like outgear everything. Um, there's some other things I could go into of like the difference of the most powerful and least power or mid powerful builds and how we do difficulty. Or maybe we'll get that a different answer, but that's the TLDR. I think we're still trying to figure out what is best for our game and what our players like. In my heart of hearts, I'm more like you, Rax. I love the very, very crazy hard things. I don't mind one shots personally in my games, but I don't think it's best for this game.
Yeah. It's
For
not
the people that
millennia.
we have play it. Yeah, I don't think that it's best long term, but having a little bit of that kind of stuff sometimes I think is okay. I think it's more how much and how we introduce it and how we frame it to people. That's the simple answer. So
Okay. So kind of like one thing that you guys are liking is kind of like the soft enrages where over time, eventually it gets so difficult that you're eventually going to lose.
Yeah,
I'm
Final
trying
Fantasy
that now.
14 does a good job with this as well. Like they have this idea, like if you mess up a mechanic, you're gonna get stacking debuff, and it can escalate and get worse and worse as the fight goes on. It's an interesting way to allow for some mistakes to occur, for some learning to happen, but really and to punish you, but not immediately spike you and end the encounter.
Awesome. So one thing that some other games doing is they release roadmaps of kind of like in the same topic of Endgame of things that Callie, stop it, sit down. Sorry about that. So for Diablo 4, will we ever see roadmaps come out kind of showing, like, detailing what might be coming in the next 6 months to a year? I know that there's some challenges with that. Like, if you guys change your mind, then like the community gets really mad at you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's important that the community knows that we are identifying problems, and that we are listening, as I've said before. And I think that a roadmap does a good job of expressing some of this information, but it does, to your point, does lock us into a schedule. So I think that we're kind of like thinking about how we want to approach like explaining these sorts of things. Like, you'll recall back in like season 2, I mentioned at the very end of actually between when we were wrapping up season 2 and AOZ was out and we were getting ready to begin talking about season 3, I mentioned that we had identified a lot of itemization issues and things that we wanted to make like upgrades to and make a number of updates, which turned into the Season of Loot Reborn in season 4. I wanted to make it clear that we identified a lot of the issues that the players have been talking to us about for a while, but we weren't able to like immediately resolve those sorts of things. So I don't want. One thing when I occasionally see from players when they see a long roadmap is they'll see something that they care deeply about it, like really, really towards the end of a year, and they'll ask them like, well, do they not think this is important? Do they not care about this? And I think that there's a way for us to talk about these things that players feel that they have confidence, like that we are looking at these problems and we do have plans. So I think we're just working through exactly the way that we want to approach this.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in a little bit. One of the things that you're going to hear as a constant theme from me and other designers say this with different words, but there's this idea that there's rarely really perfect solutions. There's really only trade-offs in the world. And this actually comes from an economic term that says that there's never solutions, only trade-offs. But when you ask us things like, why don't you do X or Y, or why don't you provide roadmaps? The way that our brains immediately go is, well, there's pros and cons, and which decision is best, trying to get the most pros that we can with the least cons that we can, right? A simple example with roadmaps is the pro of roadmap is everybody's on the same page. We show that, hey, we care about these things and the community knows what to expect, right? Obviously, that is a desirable thing to do. But there's big cons that maybe we have that you don't see, and this is where most design discussions end up, of people asking us, well, what do you think as developers? Is that we try to explain the cons to you so you understand the full picture. The cons of a roadmap is we're locked in now. We've promised things to you that we may not be able to do for whatever reason when things end up changing down the road, right? Life has a way of screwing with your plans, especially when you try to plan things more long term. This isn't just true with game design, but anything. So we try to make promises and keep promises. Like, one of my things I'm really passionate about as a designer is when it comes to interacting with the community, making promises and then keeping them. So I'm extremely careful of the promises that I made. This is just my strategy of how to build trust with people and the community and just life in general, is I'm very careful of what promises I make, and then I make damn sure when I do that I keep them. And so to do that, the longer our roadmap goes out, the higher chance we're not going to keep those promises. Some things, for example, that we've seeded in the past, I remember it was either our season 1 or season 2 campfire chat. I made a list of things that our team wants to do longer term. One of those things on those lists was making scaling mechanics for legendaries that kind of suck. And we finally were doing that in season 4, right? Your earthquake legendaries, all of those, we finally made them scale with your weapon to make the damage go up. I also talked about at the time, and we haven't delivered on this yet, in my opinion, but making ultimates meaningful and scale in a similar way. It's on our radar. It's something I want to do. Haven't done it yet. I didn't give a date because I don't know when the date is, because our timelines and schedules and priorities changed quite a bit based on community feedback. If I had made the promise like, hey, we're definitely fixing ultimates, then Loot Reborn wouldn't have happened, because I have to spend my team's time on doing that other thing. But this other thing came up that I think is way more important for the game. And that's just kind of how the nature of our job goes.
Thank you for the super detailed answer. And that is a perfect segue into my next question. It's kind of like an edition of Mythbusters, kind of. So a lot of people in the community, a lot of the people that are angry in the community about, whatever it is they're angry about at the time, they say that
passionate. They're passionate about something.
Passionate.
Right? Very passionate.
That's the word we're looking for.
Constructively passionate, yeah.
Yeah, constructively passionate.
So one thing that they have like the meme video of you guys saying feedback, feedback, feedback. And then on the internet from a bunch of different angles, they say Blizzard doesn't listen to feedback. They don't do anything. They don't even test their game. We're their beta testers, da, 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 da. So I wanted to ask you guys, could you give us some insights into how your team actually processes and internalizes feedback? Is it like concatenated for you and you guys have a meeting and you discuss it like that? How do you guys go about testing things internally to kind of debunk all of these myths that you guys are just working by yourselves and never listening to anything, which we know is
Sure.
not true?
You want to go first, Joe, or?
Yeah, I think we both probably have different
Right.
things we want to say about this. So I think
Yeah.
that the point on feedback, I think you're that's being brought up. There's like kind of two things. Like one, are the designers in a corner entirely by themselves, like just making decisions with no information being given to them? And the other version is like, is the team listening to the community, right? And then how do we process these sorts of things, right? So starting from the does the team listen to the community like side of this thing, we are always reading everything on that's getting posted on Reddit. We're getting everything that's posted on the forums. We're going through our socials on a regular basis. We have teams of people like Adam Fletcher, the community director. He's going through and like kind of gathering a lot of this information for us, and in places where like I personally can't read every thread in every social media site, right?
You can't?
But I can't, because there's other things I also do as part of my job, but I do read a lot of stuff, right? And a lot of things get sent to me. So a lot of that stuff can get like kind of pulled together for like reporting purposes and brought to us, right? And I think that's really, really useful. We also have a lot of internal feedback that we get from the team. Like, so when we start working on something, we were able to like kind of give a presentation to the overall dev team to get an idea of what we're trying to do. We have regular play tests where like a large group of people all get a chance to kind of give us feedback on a regular basis, and we can keep checking in with them as time goes on. So that's I think that's a starting point for these things. But it's really important to us that we are like hearing things from the community, because that's kind of telling us like are the changes that we're making right now, are they effective? Like, are people having a good time with these things? Because we can look at all kinds of data to determine things, but like hearing when people talk about it is also really, really important. When players have needs that aren't met, it's our job to find ways to kind of like bridge the gap there and make sure that they're being heard and the game is going to be more fun for them. But what do you want to talk about?
Yeah. So firstly, I would say different game companies, different teams, and even different teams within a bigger team have different cultures and ideas and ways that they process feedback. So I'll tell you what I do on my team and kind of what D4 kind of does as a larger team, right? So on the live team, we are probably the most interactive with feedback because we're doing the live changes. We have to be very connected to the game to make good decisions. So I give this speech a lot to the people in my group of your job as a designer is to go and find the problems with the game, and then you are the filter when the community comes in and brings up things, whether it's a streamer giving things. I post things all the time from streamers. I post things all the time from Reddit threads. I post things all the time from our forums. Anywhere that you can go out and go, and also personal play experience. Nothing replaces that as well. So we actually dedicate every day at least some amount of time that everybody in my group is either playing an internal build of future things coming out in the game, which I'm playing through season 5 right now, and I'm really far in it, or they're playing their live character in the live game, because you need to understand the game and understand the problems. And the way that I do things, and what I've been trying to tell my team, and I think we're pretty good at, is while you are parsing all of this feedback, and playing the game yourself, you keep a running list of notes of crap that sucks that you want to make better, or ideas that other people had that you think are good ideas that you want to make better. Now, of course, not every idea is equal, right? You don't copy every Reddit thread and every single thing that someone says. We are the filter of trying to figure out. Remember, I talked about those no perfect solutions, only trade-offs. This is where we're like, hey, they brought up an idea and we think it's good. Now we need to explore if that can actually work in the game. And this is where we come up with our list of things and priorities that we're going to do. That's a starting point. That's one of a few starting points. The first starting point is, community feedback, our own play experience. Another one is telemetry. That's just a fancy word for data. We have the ability to see data all over the game of how many people are equipping different legendary aspects, how many people are engaging with certain types of content. We can see what's working, what's not working, what people are actually doing versus what they say. Usually what they say will match what people are doing, but there's a mismatch. Then we have to have a discussion of like, hey, how important is this actually? And then another way is internal testing tools. Again, we have groups that give us presentations, and people who their job is to look through data and do focus sessions and all kinds of other fancy tricks to come up with stories and understanding the different types of players we have and what they're doing and how they work. And they give us presentations on different topics that we're interested in, or they find their own topics of things that maybe we didn't think of that we may have missed. And then last but not least, we have internal people. You know, we have a big team of people working on this game, and we have certain feedback avenues via emails or channels that we give feedback to each other, because on new stuff, we can't rely on telemetry or the community or all those other things. And that's where things are a lot harder. I think Joe went into this yesterday a little more deeper, so I'll just gloss over it. But this idea that Diablo is a freaking huge game that takes forever to play and really truly understand, because our systems are so interconnected. So there is no substitute for actually going through that 80+ hour experience and playing everything. The part that makes that really hard, and where I think the community gives us a hard time sometimes, I think a little bit of it is warranted, but it's a cursed problem is what I call it, which is another concept I'll go into later, is that to really test our game, you need to spend your life playing our game in many ways, or a lot of time, more times, more hours than what you normally would expect someone to work at a job, right? So we can't tell people, hey, you must spend all your life playing this game, but also, by the way, you have to design and create the new things too, right? So that means that internally, it is really hard to play test the full amount of our game as a designer. We have to rely on, we have people in QA and other play testers that do play this content. We either direct them of things we want to test and play, or they just find things on their own that they think, hey, they bring it up to us like, hey, we think this is a problem, and we have to parse that. But there isn't enough time for a single designer or every designer to play the game fully all the time, but we do still play it a good amount, and we use those internal feedback mechanisms to make things the best that they can. And this is where I think there is that little disconnect sometimes with the community, where, yeah, we would love to polish things and play it. Now, I would love to play Season 5 200 hours before it comes out. I only get it for, 50 hours, right? And we have to use our guts and existing ideas and telemetry to figure out if the decisions we make are right. And then we use, after we launch the game, to really fine tune and make it perfect, right? And that's kind of the overall process of how things work.
Yeah, one last thing I want to add here too is that even when we're just thinking about like a feature, like we're talking about like adding one thing, like something like the pit, for example, good example, because it's gonna be new coming out in season 4. If you sit down and you play the pit for an hour one day, you're gonna feel a certain way about your experience playing the pit. You're gonna feel differently if you play that for 2 hours a day, 5 days straight. And you experience it through that entire process. You're gonna have a different relationship with the content at that point. And players are gonna go, 10, 20x that number by the time they're done playing in the season potentially. So like it's really, really important that we get the reps in on these features to make sure that they're really resonating and they're singing, they're doing everything they need to do, right? So I think if there's a lot of truth to everything that Adam's talking about. Everything is a lot of trade-offs. There's a lot of things we need to do. And this kind of links to the PTR. The PTR feedback for season 4 was hugely valuable, because now suddenly we're able to like take what we already know about the season and then multiply that like 10, 20, 50 fold as we get tons of players going in, checking things out, not just from the telemetry, but also just in the feedback we're getting from content creators, from players themselves. Like we've got a lot of really good data for that. So it's been very useful for the same reasons that Adam talks about.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
One last real quick thing is, this is where you get things that seem obvious to players that were bad ideas, but sounded like really good ideas when we're sitting in a room talking about it. A simple example I'll give in season 4 is when you temper your items or things, and there's like a really nice thing that plays and you can see it, it's visual, but you can't skip it easily, right? That kind of stuff is where sometimes things fall through the cracks of, hey, doing this 2,000 times is actually terrible because you got to wait forever. Versus, well, we want to have a moment of celebration and for the cool thing to be cool. Balancing these things is what can be harder to do internally. Where obviously we've messed up enough times, and this is true for every game company, so I'm not afraid to admit it. But like, we've made that mistake enough times that we're very cognizant of it. Like we make a new feature or a new activity, like, hey, how does this feel if you're doing it for 200 hours? Is this still going to be something that people want to go through, right? That's a question now that we ask all the time. But even then, there are times where we have to kill otherwise good ideas, or we have to flex a little bit because we do need some presentation or some tutorialization or some other thing to balance that, even if it makes the 2,000 times experience a little bit worse, right? The answer is not always so obvious, I guess, but we are receptive to, like, when the community tells us clearly, hey, no, we want it to be this way, we're going to do it that way.
I mean, it was a lot of great points. I mean, I'm very glad that I asked that question, because the thing that is refreshing to me, the thing that I wanted to hear more than anything, is that you guys have a chance to actually play through the game, and not only to hear that you guys play the game as almost part of the job description, but it sounds like you actually put a big effort into that. I mean, that makes me feel great, honestly. That's so great to hear. I'm so glad that's part of the process. Um, Talking about some of the current modes in the game. Let's talk about, you talked about yesterday the State of Nightmare Dungeons. CJ did a ton of iteration on it. Now we can teleport to them. You just buffed Glyph XP. You said that you'd like to add more fun things to do to them in the future. You guys made events better now. I saw goblin packs, I think, on the PTR. When you put the vampire ambushes, that was good. You reduced the cast time down to 0.75 seconds. So we're going to have new things coming out for it. My question is going forward, it looks like you guys made a ton of qualitative changes to it. Like you just make it a little bit easier to access all of these different things rather than riding around on your pony to every single thing, and everything takes forever. When you are designing future things, is that kind of at the front of your mind with things like, oh, maybe at Nightmare Dungeons, we can carry multiple objects? Because if there's 2 rocks and 2 pedestals, if you go rock, rock, you're guaranteed to backtrack. I mean, I have 2 hands. And then have you thought about reducing the cast time even further? I know that one comment was if the cast time is so low, then people may not even see that they interacted with something, but maybe that could be updated via like a little quest thing. Oh, quest, pick up 2 rocks. Oh, it highlights. Oh, now pick up 1 rock. And another part of it was it's not just that I have a problem freeing prisoners. I have a problem going to Dead Man's Dredge, and the quest objective is I have to free 7 prisoners. Like, how many people got caught here? Is qualitative stuff still at the front of your mind when you're iterating on these things and in the future events that you're going to make?
So I think that there's a couple different pieces to pick apart here, right? So with Nightmare Dungeons, they're building upon the dungeons we had in Diablo 4, right? And these were supposed to be these really like kind of interesting little content things you could find all over the world. They all had little bits of like environmental storytelling, objective-based storytelling, some side quests point to these dungeons as well. And we want players to feel like they're going on a little bit of an adventure when they go into these. We didn't initially make the content in these spaces to feel like they were just like blast corridors, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. So I think that as we think about what different players are looking for and what we can do to improve the experience for everybody, we don't want to lose the kind of like the contextual and like fantasy underpinnings of what players are doing when they go into these spaces. To your point, like, it's not that you hate freeing prisoners, but you don't like that it might take 0.75 seconds to do it is one question maybe. And then there's another one where it's like, we don't want to free 7. So you kind of want it to be like a faster, more punchy experience, but it's not that you don't like having to click those objects as part of your experience going through a dungeon. I think that like there's an expectation when players are like doing some of these actions that there is a response. So having just a quest tick for some things, I'm not saying that this is we would only ever make this decision. And a quest tick for things like freeing a prisoner, it is feedback. Is it as impactful as having the moment where you get to see your character unbind on the binds? I'm not so sure, but in the end, is that value? It's to Adam's point earlier about like, it's about making trade-offs. Is the idea for the player who does care about like kind of going slowly through the space and trying to find the collectibles and trying to do all these things? For that player, is it going to be a big miss for them if they click on stuff and it just kind of like has a quick update, doesn't feel like anything really changed? So it's sort of like where we want to optimize things. I think when you look at content like the pit, and it's a lot of things we did in Helltide as well. We've made a lot of attempts to try to make sure that the content feels like there is less friction, as you're going through. So like when you get into a flow state that you're happy with, that you can kind of maintain that pace. So, and we made a number of changes you already called out to Nightmare Dungeons to also kind of support this. So I think it's a question of like how much further do we want to go within Nightmare Dungeons specifically, right? Because I think we've already said that we're looking at this for other pieces of content. I don't know where we're going to fall necessarily for the channel time for clicking on objects and freeing them. It could be that it comes down a little bit lower. It could be that we decide we want to make changes to make it more instantaneous. We haven't really made a decision. We'll continue to be looking at feedback as we play, and also from like different players, like players who are just playing Diablo 4 for the first time, want to kind of hear what their experience is like as well.
Awesome. So here's kind of like maybe a huge question, but asked very directly. So what is kind of the future of the overworld in Diablo 4? When we first released, it was kind of the main thing. You used it to do everything, and kind of the first experience was that 50 to 100 grind. Now 1 to 100 is much easier, and the focus is probably, enjoying that journey, going to the pit, and anything in the future that you're going to release. A lot of the things that seem to come out, though, the abattoir and the challenge rift thing and the pit, they're all instanced things. Are there big plans for the overworld? Is that still like the defining characteristic of Diablo 4, or are we moving away from that?
So Diablo 4 and the fact that we have this like big contiguous sanctuary is still a really big part of Diablo 4. I think that we want to continue to expand the landmass and the areas where players can explore. That's still an important part of things. But in terms of how players are engaging with the experience overall, we do expect that one of the downsides of the open world is that it's a fixed layout, right? So if we think about like the sorts of things that players like to play in a like a replayable content fashion, right? It's not normally in place where you like really want to keep running through exactly the same glade in the fracture piece or exactly the same area, of Kazakhstan. Like it's usually you're trying to like find like different things to kind of go engage with, and like our dungeon systems are places where we can really do a lot more of that. I think we push it really well within Helltides. There's lots of things happening in Helltides. They're pretty procedural in terms of how things respond in and like what sorts of events you might find as you're kind of wandering around. But in terms of like having a lot more like flexibility to create different experiences, we have that really more in other systems. But I think this is like going back to some things I talked about the other day. There's sort of like the experience that a player has. Diablo is a big game, right? And I don't say that to suggest that anyone's needs are less important. Just that there are a lot of different needs. Different players have different expectations. So when some players come into Diablo, like they're here because they want to go through like this epic story. They want to play they really want to play a sorceress, and they want to like see what happens to Lilith. They want to go explore they want to find all the things in all the zones, and they want to get really, really powerful. And then they're gonna take a break until the expansion comes out. That's just the way that they sort of play these games. That's how they play, right? Yeah. For those players, these moments as they explore the world, it's really, really important because that's their experience with Diablo. It's like their exploration of the overworld, them going and finding all of these side quests, talking to all these characters, and that's their relationship with the game. For players who play seasonally, it's once you've kind of like uncovered all the map locations, once you've found all these things and done this stuff, there's not usually a lot of reasons why you want to go and have that same moment of discovery again. You can't really recreate it. We talked for a while about like moving Lilith statues around season to season, so you'd have to collect them again. It's another one of my brilliant ideas. Yeah. So we didn't do it, of course, right? But like we had the idea of like every season we'd move where the Lilith statues could be found, so players would have to go find them again. But then the next conversation is immediately like, well, okay, so people are going to go onto Maximal or whatever, and they're going to go immediately see where the node map is for the next set of Altar Lilith. They're going to then that's now their new homework they have to do at the beginning of every season. They have to run around on their horse and go collect every single one of these. And it's like, is that fun? No, clearly not for that player. But it wasn't that it was necessarily horrible the first time players do this. Like that's part of the fun of like almost like an open world game anyway. It's kind of like exploration and finding things. So I know that I'm getting to go long, but so I think that the underpinning point here is that the overworld of Diablo 4 is still really, really important. As we think about how to make the best use of it for like replayable content, Helltide's a good example of this. Blood Harvest was really, really, really helpful for kind of giving us some like ideas of what players are really excited about, things that we could do better, like the like kind of light social gameplay of summoning creatures and things. And I think we have other ideas we continue to explore in that direction. I think Legion events and boss events are things we continue to like kind of iterate on and think more about. But I think that in terms of creating like really compelling replayable content, I think it's going to end up being in more of the space where we have like more procedural control over how like the dungeon is formulated or like what players can expect to encounter, as opposed to these more fixed outdoor locations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I guess
laughing at me. I didn't answer the question.
No. These are such in-depth answers. I'm just scared. I'm looking over at my questions. I'm trying to figure out how to skip around for all of them. So I'm so sorry. No. So the main takeaway that I'm getting there is the overworld is a super important part of it, like a first player's experience, discovering everything. But then it's hard to recreate that magic for the people that come season to season to season, and that's why it goes more to instanced stuff. Is kind of, I guess, the summary of it.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, I think we're also just on a regular basis looking for new ways to engage with the open world in ways that are going to be fun for seasonal players as well. Like, so we're continuing to find, like, just experimenting with things, see what makes it like fun and new for players.
Okay, I promised I would ask this. So there might be a player out there that you guys have heard of and have maybe added, I don't know, hundreds of hours of overtime to the team. Rob, and
Yeah, I'm
Rob,
familiar.
you're familiar.
Just a little familiar. Yeah.
So
Good
he
guy,
had
that Rob. Love
he,
Rob.
he is a good guy. He is a good guy. He had
Yep.
2 questions about the pit. These are probably a little bit more straightforward, but I guess for end game activities, do you guys ever think about or worry about, I guess, fishing? So like it gets to a point in the pit where, oh, you're fishing for the right mob type, or you're fishing for the right boss, and then you just leave, kind of like what happened in Diablo 3. Or, oh, I'm going to go get Ahavarion and hopefully that it procs the amazing shrine for me so then I can finally win. And do you guys, off the top of your head, know about how much the health in the pit was buffed by? And I'm guessing that the main idea for there is not only to add difficulty, but to actually, because when you were going through the pit, the builds are so strong that you delete the rift part of it in 2 minutes, like clockwork every time, and the monsters don't even get to do anything. So I assume like the part of the reason for buffing it is to actually even let them get a hit on you and see what they even do.
Yeah. I can take the first part of the question at least. I mean, I can take both too if Joe wants to take the other part. So talking about fishing. Yes, fishing for stuff keeps me up at night, and I hate the problem, and it's a really hard problem to solve. Remember that rarely perfect solutions, only trade-offs thing, right? So this very much applies to this type of problem, right? A core thing that we want in our game is, and when it comes to combat and effects and legendary powers and unique powers and whatever, is we want to push the envelope, make cool shit, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you need to make cool stuff, right? And that involves doing things that aren't necessarily completely deterministic, because I think completely deterministic things after a while get kind of boring, right? When you know that you're going to get this effect, or it's up all the time, or you do this and get this. Like, we do it a lot, by the way, so I'm not saying that's not a good design, but just
Yeah.
you need to have some spiciness, some really cool, crazy things, right?
Yes.
And that unique, uber unique power is one of those. On the flip side, though, it means that when you make really hard content, doing things like wanting to make cool stuff, fishing gets in the way of that a lot of times, especially in randomly generated content, which is what, the pit is in many ways. So that is why we have to do things that, by the way, we as designers don't like removing the fun shrines or the things that are going to break, because then you just find the shrines that, break the game in whatever way, and that's all that you're doing, and that becomes the game.
Yep.
This is a core thing about ARPGs that in my opinion, after working on it now for years, and I've been involved in pretty much every game genre extensively as a player and many as a designer, I think ARPGs are one of the hardest, if not the hardest, genre to design for. MMOs are really high up there too. There's a lot of other genres I think are very difficult, but ARPGs are a special slice of awfulness when it comes to trying to make things fun and also make them interesting. And this is one of the reasons why. So as far as like this exact design of the spear, we're keeping it in for now. I would be very sad if we had to redesign it, because it's the only way to get through high pit tiers. That would make me personally sad, but because that is the most difficult thing to do, we may have to make a tweak to it, but we're not doing it yet. We're going to see how it plays out. But I think that the conversation is more interesting of conceptually, like, is this a problem? Yes, absolutely. Does it mean that we can't do things that would otherwise be cool and awesome for your average player? Yes, absolutely. But we also think it's best for the game, because I think fishing for the right tile set, the right mob, like restarting a thing over and over to be able to progress is not fun. And therefore, we have to design the rest of our game knowing that that is a thing.
Yeah, just adding to that too. Like, I think that, we definitely see fishing as a problem, so much so that we built the gauntlet, for the trials feature with fishing specifically as the thing we're trying to account for. Where we said, all right, if we have a competitive content feature players are going to engage with and it's randomized, then players aren't really competing until they find exactly the right seed that they manage to roll to compete against, because that's the actual optimal seed that they need to compete on.
Yeah.
It's only against this monster family, or only with this dungeon tile layout, or only with this, like, these set of shrines, or whatever it is. So instead what we did is we made a highly deterministic content type that changed it every week. And players went to it and said, like, well, why is it so fixed? Like, this is boring. Like, I want something that's different and changes every time. But then you kind of fall back to that same point that I brought up about, like, the trade-offs for all the problems that we have. Then we have to decide, like, all right, so are we okay with the idea that like players are going to go into a gauntlet run, and they're going to have a wildly disparate experience potentially between person A and person B, and they're just continually running the content over and over again in the hopes they eventually get a good seed, and that might be the way that they're able to place, because the difference could potentially be vast between one thing and the next. So it's it's a complicated space, something we definitely think about. The other part of your question was what do we do about the like health scaling in the pit?
The HP, yeah. How much did it go up by?
Yeah, so we did make some big changes there. So basically what was happening in the PTR is that monster health scaling was pretty mild in the pit going through the first 100 levels. It was basically virtually nil, from level 100 on, more or less, right? So we ended up putting it in a place where like the tier 200 pit is like, okay, so like around tier 150 pit is like close to where AOZ was, for like tier 25 AOZ runs, and tier 200 goes beyond that. So it's pretty considerable. The scaling has been increased.
Okay.
We still want it to be gradual as you're kind of progressing through, because we want you to feel that you have a place to push. It's not like because AOZ was 25 tiers, extremely chunky when you went from tier to tier as you got deeper and deeper inside. Here it's a little more gradual as you go further and further, and we think that that's going to be good experience overall. Because it's ultimately a lot of the materials you really want from the pit you can gain by the time you're like doing like tier 60s. You start to get like little bits of the neath iron that you need to kind of start finishing off your masterwork items, and then that gets more and more efficient as you go deeper and deeper. But we do want to have these like really difficult challenges. We made a decision at the launch period of the game where we took Nightmare Dungeons difficulty and we kind of scaled it in a different way. Whereas like initially they were extremely challenging going up to tier 100, and we ended up making a reduction in their difficulty going into season 1, where we basically rebalanced things such that like the tier 75 old Nightmare Dungeon was the new tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon, and players no longer had that measuring stick, that really difficult content anymore, because we kind of took it away. We want that to still be there in the pit.
I mean, I think if tier 200 is far beyond Abattoir of 0.25, especially with some of like the balancing and the bug fixes to a lot of different builds, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I expect that to be pretty challenging. I don't think people are going to do that as a cakewalk. Okay, so we have 8 minutes left. I already cut off my timer. There's no way I can get to 99% of these questions. So how do we feel about maybe doing a little rapid fire? Okay.
Sure, yeah.
This was talked about yesterday, if I remember correct. So these are the top questions from YouTube. So I promised I would ask them. So here we go. This was the number one question by far, and it was touched on a little bit yesterday. Is there an Armory coming? I heard yesterday, I think if I quote you correctly, you said that Armory is great. The team likes it, had to prioritize some things. Will an Armory be coming to Diablo 4 so we can save our builds? If you can answer it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem that I think that players have. I think I've already mentioned that we're in the business of trying to like solve player problems. It's a thing we're really excited about. It's a thing we would like to do, and that's all I can say right now.
They're excited about it, guys. Okay. There's lots of different ways to expand the game, and as Joe put it yesterday, different slices of the pizza to give you power. Again, from YouTube, it seems like the most requested way that people would like to expand power or change their builds is to have the skill tree expanded. Is that something that we can look forward to at some point coming to Diablo 4? Is the team passionate about expanding the skill tree in multiple ways? Maybe you even give us an ultimate button so we can get another skill. You never know.
Yeah, I'll take this one, I guess, unless you want to say some more. I would say we have nothing to announce about big updates to the skill tree. It is a little bit more of a complicated problem because we want the skill tree to remain as an easy gateway for new players and returning players to come back and kind of know what that is. And we didn't want the complexity and heft of our game to be there. So it comes with some nasty trade-offs that I'm not sure that we're willing to make, but we are open to the idea of adding some more depth to the skill tree, but we don't want it to be super complicated.
It's not going to be the PoE encyclopedia.
We don't want that, at least not for our game. We want the depth to be in crafting and in other places.
Yeah, if I could show like seeing how different players, like, again, there's a lot of people who, like, this is their first Diablo game. Like, seeing what players did with the skill tree in testing,
Yeah,
I think would be very surprising to you and your audience.
They take all the generators and max them
Yep.
to 5.
Oh, absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oof.
And other things like that.
Yep.
It's a tougher problem than I think a lot of people give it credit for, and I don't know that the juice is worth the squeeze if we go too far. But hearing that people want more, we've heard that loud and clear, but nothing to announce in the immediate future.
Okay, the next one. For repeated and summoning content now and in the future of the game, are there plans to let people just resummon these bosses without resetting the instance? Because that eats up a lot of time for the people that do want to farm up a bunch of things and kill some bosses.
Yeah, this is a really good idea. There's a lot of things that get cleaned up when players reset a dungeon that makes it a lot easier for us to do this in the first place. Let me take that back to the team. I don't know that we've talked deeply about like exactly when we could deliver something like this, but we definitely see it as something that you can improve. So yeah, we'll take that back.
All right. Last one from YouTube here. Will the campaign receive further attention? So, first of all, obviously, probably the story continues with the expansion. But another way is currently when you start up a new season of Diablo, you can go through the campaign again if you want, or you can probably now go farm in Helltide. And the Helltide is going to level you 1,000,000 times faster for 1,000,000 more rewards. It's not close at all. And some games force you to do the campaign. Some games in Diablo 4 you don't have to. Have you guys thought about maybe editing the campaign slightly for a replay, maybe taking out like the camel escort for example, and maybe benchmarking how long does it take to do a campaign just normally playing? What is it, 3 hours, 4 hours? I don't know what it would be. And then benchmarking what it would be to do it in Helltide and kind of have them at the same point at the end of those journeys, to allow players a real choice in how they want to start out their new season, because the campaign was such a fan favorite on the launch and it was very well done.
Sure. So I think that there's like the Quest team has a lot of really cool ideas of things that you want to do to allow for players to like replay the campaign or to make it to kind of edit it a little bit in some ways like you suggest. I think that it's a thing that we're thinking about as we go, but we know that we want to make sure that we are prioritizing the piece of the game that need work first, if that makes sense. Like I think that the idea of being able to replay a campaign is very, very exciting. And I think that there's really neat things we can do. And we do have plans in the future for this stuff as well. I don't want to like make it sound like we're not committing to anything here. We kind of do want to do something like this. It's just that there's a lot of other like replay features, like Helltide, for example, that we thought we're in a great position to like lift up and make feel like more exciting for players. So that's been more of a priority for us. But I do think that there's opportunities there for sure.
Something there I want to point out, and this would help when the community is discussing things or when you even are with us, is this idea of opportunity cost. I don't know if you know what. Are you familiar with that term, Rax?
Yeah, economics.
Maybe
Yeah.
not.
Give
Yeah,
up something
okay.
to gain something else.
Cool. Then I don't have to explain it. But yeah, the opportunity cost comes very heavy into play when we talk about features and suggestions and things from players. I think a lot of times it can be frustrating as a member of a community, because I'm a member of gaming communities too, so I know how it is. I'm like, hey, this thing, it sounds like a good idea and we all agree it's a good idea. Why don't the devs do it right away? And most of the time when that is true, it's because of opportunity costs. It's either opportunity costs or something that you didn't realize makes it harder than it seems. But opportunity costs, here it's like, do we do loot reborn? Do we redo how all the loot works in the game and your entire leveling experience with our updates to Helltide? Or do we make the campaign have parity with not doing campaign to level up, right? Now, having campaign have parity to non-campaign obviously is a good thing, but I would argue very heavily that loot being better in a loot-based game is more important and impacts more people in a better way, in a more long-term way. And then the list goes long and long, forever of the things that you could do versus what you have to decide to do. And then the other part, kind of alluding to your last question about resummoning bosses, is that I would say in that one, like, yeah, obviously, good idea, better player experience. In there, I would say the reason why we're not doing it, just knowing how the game works a little bit more, is our game wasn't structured that way, and we have to do a lot of things to make it structured that way. And the answer to actually do it is harder than most people would think, and that is why. Both of these things are obviously good ideas that we would want. There's different reasons why we haven't done them yet. Doesn't mean they won't happen, but it means that it's why they're not happening now or yet. And that's a better way to frame it when people are talking to each other. It's like, hey, what should the Diablo 4 team do first or now? Or, hey, maybe this is a little bit harder. Could you explain why it's harder? Would be a good question for an interviewer, for example, right? Because then you're going to get actual insight into why rather than just complaining that it's not
Are
happening.
you providing
Right.
Rax feedback on this?
I mean,
I might be giving feedback on
No,
feedback.
come
That's
on.
part of my job too. But I like productive conversations is why. And I think the community would rather have more productive conversations than their only avenue is to complain and not know why things aren't working the way that they want them to.
I think people want to know how things work. I think that
I
makes
think
sense.
they want to know how
Yeah.
things work. I want to educate people so that we can have better conversations about games.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm a loser, guys. I'm always here if you guys ever want to talk. Which we're at, we're actually at time.
Want to ask one more?
All right. I mean, probably the one that I'm just going to ask a 15-part question then to abuse the one more. I guess
I love it. Gamer at heart.
Probably the most important one that's still left on the list is about social features. So I have three main topics of I can't believe how many questions I put here. That was so stupid of me. I mean, there's no chance at all. Anyway, social features. So there's three main things: trading, group finder, clans. So with trading, what are your guys' thoughts on putting an auction house-esque type of thing just to allow trading and to avoid third-party sites? Obviously, not a real money auction house. People are begging for a group finder. I don't know why. People have cooties. I'd rather play by myself, but I guess people want it. And then clans, I understand. I understand there's a big difficulty with clans. Not just implementing them, like they were implemented in Diablo 3, but Diablo 3 clans mean absolutely nothing. It's just a second friends list. There's no achievements to do. There's nothing to unlock. There's nothing to work toward. But then if you put that in the game, opportunity cost, the thing that the economic principle we keep talking about, then if you build that in the game, then people have to belong to a clan. And otherwise they feel left out, which then leads me to another one of my million questions about SSF, but whatever. So for social features, trading, group finder, clans, what are your guys' thoughts on those three for Diablo 4?
Let's get going. So for trading, okay? Trading in Season 4, players can trade legendaries and uniques. They're still going to have to go and actually meet up to do those trades. There's not going to be an automated trading function. There are things we're talking about with regards to the trade chat channel to make it a little bit easier to navigate. In terms of creating an actual auction house user interface, it's a thing the team has discussed, but it's not a thing we've landed on. We really want to see what the reaction is from players in Season 4 and what the experience is broadly for players in Season 4. How many players are actually trading? Because I imagine there's going to be, it'll be different for different types of players, right? But I think there could potentially be room for an investment there because we don't want to just push players just to third-party sites. But we were at a point where we're like, well, do we really want to go and make a whole? It would be opportunity cost would be a big investment to go make an auction house for Diablo 4, for example, without knowing exactly what the desire for it is going to be, and we didn't want to wait to let some of these things be tradable in the meantime. So that's the high-level version. We're not opposed to it. We want to see how things go in Season 4. With regards to the group finder, I think is the way that you call it. We do want to make sure that there are easier systems for players to use to find parties of players who are doing things that interest them. We do have a social team on Diablo 4. They've been thinking about clan stuff, things like this, things that make socialization more easy between players. I think there'll be exciting stuff to share in the future. So there's things we're thinking about. And there are, and then with regards to, what's the last one? Clans, of course, clans. We also have ideas of things we want to do to update parts of the clan functionality to make it just a little more engaging, to give more purpose to parts of clans. This is a thing that we have designs for and things we're thinking about, but I can't announce anything today. Just to say that we recognize there's some parts of social features in Diablo 4 that can be leveled up, made better, and there's process we see players going through as part of regular play in seasons that we want to make easier and more streamlined for them.
Well, I got to be honest. It was actually an honor to have you guys come here. I really like you guys. I love the Diablo franchise since I was a kid. This actually meant a lot to me. I have a million more questions, but I know we're out of time. Want to be respectful of that. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming here and speaking so open and honestly. I'm a loser. I'm always here. If you guys want to go again, I mean, you guys got three free hours. I got a lot more questions, but I guess is DM going next, or I can just pass along a million more? I'm sure they already
I
have
believe
questions.
so. Yeah, I'm on with him
Yeah,
tomorrow.
DM Gaz, right?
Yeah.
All right.
It's been a blast. It's been super fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Rex. Really appreciate it. I
Yeah.
will say we're trying to get in front of the community a little bit more and talk about these things. It's something that I really like doing and I'm pretty passionate about, and I'm looking forward to doing more. So
Thank you guys for
taking the
being
time
here.
to talk to us.
Hell yeah, let's do it again. Thank you guys. Everybody in chat, say goodbye to the lovely people at Blizzard, and I guess we'll see you in season 4.
Thank you
See you,
all.
folks.
Thanks, guys.